In the dimly lit corridors of history, certain tales remain shrouded in mystery and tragedy. These are the stories that time never quite settles, where answers remain just out of reach. Today we journey back to the cold winter day of February 5, 1940, to revisit a crime that quietly reshaped a community and left a lasting uneasiness in its wake. Decades later, the facts are still incomplete. The silence is still heavy. This is the story of Ann and Margaret Richards. Hello, friends. My name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders, where we explore the unsolved cases that still haunt America. Our story begins in the quaint yet unsuspecting town of Oliver Springs. Nestled in the heart of Tennessee, 30 miles west of Knoxville, it was a place where everyone knew each other and secrets were hard to come by. Like much of the United States, Tennessee was recovering from the economic challenges of the Great Depression. The state saw increased industrialization, especially with the demand for goods and materials during World War II, contributing to the economic growth of the area. And while the nation saw advancements in education and cultural institutions, like many southern states, Tennessee was also subject to Jim Crow laws. Segregation was prevalent, impacting various aspects of daily life, including schools and public facilities. Ann, Margaret, and Mary Richards, three unmarried sisters, lived together in their father's sprawling 18-room mansion on Main Street. While the sisters were still financially well off, having inherited substantial real estate and coal assets from both their father and grandfather, their fortune was starting to dwindle. Their father, William D. Richards, had died 9 years earlier, their mother Margaret just a year prior to the murders. With their only brother Joseph, a twin to Ann, living in Atlanta, Georgia, the sisters were now completely alone in the mansion. Besides the inheritance from their father and grandfather, the sisters did earn their own money. Margaret was a secretary for the Oliver Springs Brickyard, Ann a bank teller at Oliver Springs Bank. Mary was a third-grade teacher and librarian at the local elementary school. The sisters were also active in social, civic, and church affairs and were well known in the community for their generosity. It was commonly known that they would hire black children to haul coal, iron linens, and other general chores around the large home. 16-year-old Leonard Powder Brown was one of these children. Known around town as a timid yet gentle soul, Powder, as he was generally called, had a fear of death and guns. He lived with his aunt and uncle and 15 other children. No photograph of him is known to exist. Just after noon on the day of the murders, Mary, who was at work at the elementary school, wrote a note to her sisters confirming plans for later in the evening when the sisters planned to go see Gone with the Wind. There was no telephone at the school, and this was their usual means of communication. Each sister had purchased a new dress for the outing and were excited about a night out. Mary sent a couple of her students to deliver the note, but they returned saying that no one answered the door. A few minutes later, Mary sent 2 more students to deliver the note, and they too returned saying that no one answered the door. Mary left school at 3 p.m. to attend a missionary meeting at the home of her aunt, Mrs. Sarah Phillips. When told that her sisters were not at the meeting yet, she telephoned them. Getting no answer, she was not overly concerned, but she went back to the home to see what their delay was. Upon arriving at the house, Mary found her sister Ann in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor. Screaming hysterically, she ran from the mansion, attracting the attention of 2 neighbors, teenagers Fred Hooper and M.B. Gass. Hooper would also see Ann on the floor, and realizing that they needed adult help, they called for A.T. Hill and William Sharp, Jr. Upon entering the home, Hill and Sharp found 48-year-old Ann on the floor of the kitchen with a bullet wound to the front of her head. There were signs of a struggle and chilling evidence of how terribly ordinary the day had been just moments before. The lunch dishes were in the sink, and there was a pot of water warming on the stove. A few yards away, laying on the landing on the stairway, was 36-year-old Margaret. She had been shot twice. One bullet struck her in the throat, the other struck her in the head. Hairpins and blood near the upstairs banister indicated that she had fought with her assailant. On the second floor, just a few feet away, was the body of Powder Brown. There were conflicting reports of how his body had been positioned, with some reports stating that one arm extended through the banister and other reports stating his feet extended through the banisters. Either way, he had been shot between the eyes, and a .38 caliber pistol lay next to him. Powder burns were found on his face. It is clear from newspaper reports of the time that no real investigation was done in this case. From the outset, Sheriff Bob Smith determined that Brown shot the two sisters and then turned the gun on himself as a murder-suicide. Even though many would disagree with him, including the coroner and the inquest jury, he held firm. This mindset is not unexpected, as Brown was black and the two sisters white in an era of Jim Crow laws. The motive Smith put forth was that Brown was upset because the sisters gave another boy a better suit than they gave him. The gun found at the crime scene, a 5-shot single-action .38, belonged to a neighbor, Gerald Boss Hanna. It was reported missing from his home that same day, despite having reportedly sat on a bedside table for nearly 3 years, according to his son-in-law. Sheriff Smith speculated that Brown, who occasionally did chores at the Hanna house, had taken the weapon. Joe Kirby, a fingerprint expert from Brushy Mountain Prison, examined the gun and found no fingerprints. It was returned to Hanna just hours after the killings. While not truly investigated by police at the time, a clear timeline did emerge. At 11 a.m., lunch had been sent to the school for Mary by her sisters. When Ann was found, evidence including a stew cup found near her on the floor and the water heating on the stove indicated that she was cleaning up after the noon meal. This would put her still alive at shortly after noon. Makeup saleswoman Mrs. O.P. Jones told the inquest jury she had gone to the Richards home about 12:20 p.m. and heard someone crying in the house when she knocked on the back door. She also heard some noises but couldn't tell where they were coming from. She then went to the front door and heard 2 white men talking, although she couldn't make out what they were saying. 2 boys sent by Mary in a second attempt to deliver the note to her sisters, Joe Ray Davis and John King, met Jones in the yard. Even though Jones told them that no one was answering the door, the boys continued to the house to try to deliver the note. They put their time of arrival at approximately 1 p.m. Several days later, when questioned, Davis stated, "Just as I knocked, I heard the most awful crying. The telephone was ringing and the radio was playing, but I could hear them crying. I was scared. I looked in the cellar and saw someone pass by the light." Apparently, he never shared this information with Mary, only stating that no one answered the door and the note could not be delivered. Shortly after 3 p.m., Mary would find Ann deceased on the kitchen floor. This timeline clearly indicates the time of the killings to be between noon and 3 p.m. Even though Sheriff Smith continued to stick to his conclusion that Brown was the murderer, Coroner Joe Wilson convened an all-white Anderson County coroner's jury on February 13, 1940. With Mary and the sister's brother Joe in attendance, along with 28 witnesses who testified. After 5 hours of testimony, the panel cleared the teenager and concluded the 3 victims met their deaths at the hands of parties unknown. Despite the sheriff's insistence, it was Brown. Other information that came out during the inquest was the location of a 4th bullet found by Joe Richards in a box in the kitchen, indicating to investigators that the suspect had come up through the basement and shot Ann. They found the basement door was open and the light was on. It was also revealed that while neither Brown nor anyone in the Richards household smoked, a saucer full of cigarette butts was found in an upstairs windowsill. A.T. Hill, who had gone into the house with William Sharp initially, told reporters that he pulled the gun from Brown's hand. However, at the inquest, both he and another witness, Mitchell Buck, stated the gun was under Brown's hand. Sharp testified that the gun was by Brown's side. Witnesses testified Brown was known to be timid and easily frightened, and no one knew of him ever shooting a gun, yet the women had been shot with deadly aim. Brown was also said to have been afraid of even firecrackers. 8-year-old Tommy Diggs testified that he was one of the 4 students sent by Mary to the home that day. He recalled getting no answer, however he did hear voices inside that he said may have been the radio. He also stated that he too saw someone moving around in the basement and heard a gurgling sound. Witnesses testified that 2 white men had asked directions to the Richards home shortly before noon. Robbery was ruled out as there was $25 in cash on the mantel and other valuables were left undisturbed. Following the inquest, Joe and Mary hired a private detective from Knoxville, J.E. O'Connor. He obtained the bullets and other rounds fired from the suspected murder weapon and sent them to the FBI for ballistics testing. The results were inconclusive. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the murders of Ann and Margaret Richards and Powder Brown remained unsolved. Several theories were identified, including the fact that 2 parolees from Brushy Mountain Prison might have committed the crime and that 2 white men had asked directions to the home just before noon, but the sheriff discounted them, insisting that Brown was the killer. He discounted the statement of Mrs. Jones by saying that she probably heard the radio and not actually 2 white men talking. Although certainly not an admission of guilt, Gerald Hanna, the owner of the alleged murder weapon, remained silent and left town on the day of the inquest. His property sat directly across the street from the Richards mansion. Rumors of a long-standing dispute between the families centered on land and mineral rights dating back to the 1870s, when Hanna's father, Major John Hanna, leased property from the sisters' grandfather, Joseph Richards. Tensions escalated after Major Hanna died in 1880, followed by legal action by Richard to evict the Hanna family from the mansion. The original structure burned soon afterwards and was later replaced by the ornate Victorian home where the sisters lived. A double funeral for the sisters with more than 1,000 attendees was held in the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, with loudspeakers set up outside to carry the words of the minister to those who could not squeeze inside. They were buried side by side in the Oliver Springs Cemetery in matching metal-silver coffins lined with white crepe. They wore their new dresses. In contrast, Mary Richards, along with Leonard Hacker, the man who embalmed Brown's body, buried Powder Brown quickly and secretly in the town's black cemetery to prevent the local KKK from obtaining the body and dragging it through the streets. Hacker would state in a 2001 interview that Brown did not have powder burns on his face, despite that being the claim from the beginning. Mary Richards never returned to the home where her sisters were killed, leaving Oliver Springs to live with her brother Joe in Atlanta until her death in 1994 at the age of 93. In 2001, the case would be reopened, and then Chief Paul Massengill would eventually exonerate Brown. Massengill claims a witness finally came forward with information about 2 men seen spying on the house the day before the murders. Could this be the 2 ex-cons or the 2 white men asking for directions to the home that were discounted by the sheriff in 1940? This new witness has never been identified publicly. Massengill also identified who he believes was involved. While their names are publicly available, I have chosen not to name them as they are long deceased and have never been formally charged. These 2 men were members of the Oliver Springs community who Massengill theorized were hired by a cousin to kill the sisters over a land dispute. Massengill claims this cousin was upset because she lost a lawsuit against the sisters in 1936 in a dispute over land containing the town's noted mineral springs. I disagree with this theory. My research indicates that this lawsuit, which began in 1937, was settled 3 months prior to the killings, with Margaret, Ann, Mary, and Joseph receiving just 15 acres and the mansion as their share of the property. The cousins retained the other property. Additionally, Margaret and Ann were ordered to pay $875 in settlement to the cousins. The dispute was over 700 acres left to the children of John R. Richards and William D. Richards, along with an additional 2,000 acres left to the family by their grandfather, Joseph Richards. The wills of the 2 brothers, who had joint partnerships, stated that the land was to be divided equally. It seems to me that receiving only 15 acres as their share and having to pay a monetary settlement put the sisters on the losing end of the settlement. The mansion the Richards sisters lived in was destroyed by fire in 1947. Author Janita Ashley has taken a deep dive into this case in her book, The Unsolved Mystery of Oliver Springs, 1940. I've linked it in the description below in case you're interested. Ann and Margaret Richards were buried together, mourned by a town that filled a church beyond its capacity. Powder Brown was buried quietly, out of fear of what hatred might do to his body, even in death. The contrast between those 2 burials tells us something important about the time, the place, and the forces at work in this case. More than 80 years later, the evidence is fragmented, the witnesses are gone, and the mansion itself no longer stands. What survives is a story shaped by power, race, silence, and loss, a story where truth arrived too late to matter for those most affected by it. And so this case lingers, not because it lacks theories, but because it demands reflection. It challenges us to look closely not only at who was blamed, but how easily the truth can be buried alongside the dead. If you have any thoughts or theories about this case, please leave them in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.